So, hi everybody. Welcome to the last session of the day, saving the best for last. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Marissa Epstein. She is a senior user experience designer and my coworker at Lullabot, where she works on user research and interface design projects for clients including Georgia.gov, Harvard Library, and Pantheon. She comes to us from her home in Providence, Rhode Island, where she lives with her large dog, Elwood. Take it away, Marissa.
Thank you so much. And hopefully he won't make too much of an interruption here. But if you hear sound like my house is being torn down, it's just my dog. Yeah, thank you for the intro. I'm so excited to be here and share with you all. Thanks for, of course, making a safe space for us to do that. So just a reminder for everyone, please double click on my screen share so it's nice and big. I'm going to give you a really quick peek at the pop, and then I'm going to turn my camera off. Let's see if he'll, yeah. Hello. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and turn this off so that you can follow on the screen share for the recorders later on. I'll send him all the love. I appreciate it. In case you already forgot what I look like, I'm Marissa Epstein on Drupal, Mars Toy Ship, pretty much everywhere else. I'll skip the rest of the intro. I got a nice one. You've probably heard a bit about Lullabot, so I'll just briefly say we do web strategy, design, and development in a fully distributed way. I already get to hear about some of the projects. So yeah, I'm not here to talk about us. I want to talk about sketching, to share ideas, make decisions, and get on with it. And sketching is a really common concept. I think it can be really simple, but I wanted to try to make it approachable for anyone who might not see it that way, and dig deeper as well into a couple of things that I've learned from the last decade or so, if you are more familiar. I had a lot of fun building this talk and flipping through the decades of notebooks that I still have. And so I've been doing this forever now in one form or another. So I did want to throw in a couple highlights. This is from college. I was doing icon design, some dinosaurs in there, branding for a toy company. Then I was an art director, and so getting into web, but more sitemap flows and interaction ideas, that kind of thing. And a recent fun one, actually with West River, who was training yesterday, doing a weekend hackathon to make a game. Now, I was inspired by Taryn's featured session today, and so I wanted to put this in as well, that, of course, there's a lot of really unexpected, unusual stuff going on right now that's sort of forcing us to adapt. And so more generally, I feel like it's important to keep track of all the things. And a couple friends had specifically, coworkers had specifically asked me about how I do my sketching and keep track of my work. But I think in this context, it also is relevant to when a friend asks me, you know, how I keep my S word together. So I think that there's a little bit of that here. So the last example, I just wanted to add here of this is what my last couple of days have looked like. Just lists that are slightly visual with blockers and priorities and symbols, list on lists. Just to record everything and try to keep track. And my point here is this isn't very visual or sketchy, but I wanted to show this slightly different idea that I just want to show you a tool that might just help you put the things down on paper. So with all of these variations, it always serves me, even though the situation is so different, for these specific things, learning, producing, generating. It's a great communication tool to quickly record an idea and then share it with others and get feedback. So communication is huge in a big team, especially moving quickly. So now here's a sketch that is more what they look like today, often in UX and content strategy projects, usually large Drupal sites. So I did want to talk about this a little more specifically today. How do I integrate this sort of sketching into our web process, and share a couple examples of that. Quick agenda. I wanted to cover why I think sketching rocks and why I hope that you do too, what it's for, and different ways that I sketch for you to consider which work for you. and then a couple tips beyond the pens and pencils, like what we do remotely. And as I mentioned, a short case study. So of course, I was going to hand out paper, So, if you're isolated or in a office sharing space sort of thing, I would encourage you to just get some paper out of the printer or get a notebook if you're feeling up to it. I find that it really helps me listen and focus even if I'm doodling, but it also might help you experiment with some of the stuff that I'm talking about if you want. And I would love to see if anybody doodles or sketch notes. Just put it in the Drupal Camp Asheville Slack. First things first, why do I love sketching so much? I'll keep this pretty quick. It's a real return on investment for design projects. So it's extremely light because it's very fast, which as a result, it's really cheap. I mean, that is the shorthand, the short version of everything I wanted to explain. It has a really low barrier to entry. I think it's relevant to a lot of different roles. So we think of it as sort of UX or UI focused, but it works a lot in our content strategy conversations or project management, product ownership, those sorts of things where a visualization or a map might really support the explanation. It also does not require special tools. So you could ask someone and they have their pen or their marker. That's true. Don't ask a Lullabot content strategist about a whiteboard, but it really does not require special tools. I recently, on an onsite, did what I described earlier and stole some paper out of the office, the hotel printer, and drew with the room pen and brought those in the next day, and we used those. So it doesn't really matter what kind of paper you have. I love that it's very fast, both to do and to understand. So I'm guilty of writing 70-page briefs and hoping that someone at least reads the bulleted list. But I know that a visual is a lot more catchy, especially if you are a visual learner like I am, compared to maybe like auditory. It can be hard to just listen. You have to see it. This is just something I want to touch on for you to look at, but Ted Wujek does this really nice TED Talk about solving organizational problems by doing these activities where teams have to silently, collaboratively, visually work out these problems. So without using any words or talking to each other, explain to me how you make toast. So there's tons of these. They're all very different, but it's clear that they're also very easy to grok. It's less mental energy and faster for communicating. Also want to add here, very great way to iterate. I think this comes into a lot of agile and lean and those sorts of processes. It becomes a little more important to be able to spin up a new version during a sprint or modify an option very quickly, especially in the early phases. You can get feedback sooner and then the project's better. So I encourage everybody to make messy things because they're easier to modify. And they're also just easier to throw away. So I personally have felt the pain of, putting a lot of love into this pixel polished comp, and then we don't do the idea anymore. We're going to toss that out, and it hurts. But I don't have any problem doing 20 sketches and throwing out 19. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you're good. You're sold. Now let's go into the examples of how it fits my process roughly from the beginning to end of the web project. Discovery is a big topic, but at a very high level, we do a lot of on-sites with clients to plan future work, usually conducting a workshop where we do a lot of different activities that include sketching. Some of them are individual, some of them are small groups, sometimes we iterate. It really depends on what it is that we're trying to do. But the general thread is we're super early in the process. Maybe we're trying to solve a problem or talk about how, but we might just be trying to understand what that problem is really quickly. So how can you scope a site if you don't know what it is? Let's just dig in and just know all the things. We don't know how to solve them. It allows us to have a shared understanding, which reduces risk, obviously, So anything I can capture visually helps me validate it long before I would actually have a design. So I'm going to touch a little more on that as I go. And this doesn't really have a space, but I just thought I'd throw it in here and say it now. A lot of my sketches are just notes, just for me, like the list on the back of the envelope. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be shared with anybody. And I think the big shift that prompted me to talk about this for me is that I've been using these for a long time as personal notes, but I'm starting to shift into, first, of course, was collaborating with a design team and sharing my sketches across that group, but then seeing how to make it a more comfortable space for clients. And so I wanted to say, here is something that shows both of those examples, where this is a note that I just screenshotted from meeting notes from a 20-person sprint demo, and a couple questions arose. And so this is something that was helpful for me to share with others. It helped me, even if I didn't need that, to have a very quick reference point for what was next. And the last point I'll just make here, I know they're just call notes, is to say I really like to have my own shorthand. So I don't want to prescribe to you that a star means that you have to have a task there, or a question or a queue means you need somebody else's involvement, or what have you. But I think that just having your own system to be able to scan through it, it has been a little more effective for me in note-taking than just a really, really long paper doc that I end up swimming around in. Okay, so generating ideas. And I'm scoping this very specifically. I think this applies to a lot of things, but I was going to walk through a wireframe process here. The way that our wireframe sketches typically start is actually just a paper doc. So we have a lot of notes where we want to synthesize tons of stuff that need to be represented visually. We call this a presentation model. So you can see an example of a landing page with a little research. Maybe there are, we try to follow very specific structure around what are the needs of the organization, what are the primary audiences coming here, but just all this stuff. And so it allows us to just very quickly drink from the fire hose and then transcribe as much of this visually. We have a checklist to reference, and then that allows us to focus not on do we have all the pieces, but what is the hierarchy and the layout? How does the content flow? Like, how do we feel about this combination of functionality, as we get into our sketching. I modified an actual remote workshop agenda here, but I wanted to show you a couple things. We might have, let's say, 3 people, 2 to 8, could be in a Hangout, for example, very comfortably, and do this for an hour. We recommend about 3 with, of course, a break to really dig into a couple different things. But we aren't on the phone the whole time. So as far as what we're going through here, and I wanted to share, what we do originally is go through that presentation model together, set the scene, allow each other to discuss questions, and then we go off and sketch. So I'm often putting my headphones down, maybe I'm listening to music and just going off and working on that problem by myself. But you'll notice they're very short, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes. You'd be surprised, especially with the pressure, how much that you can start to produce. Then we all reconvene. So maybe ping in Slack, I'm ready, get in, and then switch to our review mode. So you can see sort of a briefing for A, sketch session for A1, review. But then I did have a sketch session A2 in there in review, because I really recommend just taking another 5 minutes after you walk around and share ideas to make more. I often love something else that someone else suggested, and I really want to incorporate that or change something in mine. Or maybe I said I had a problem with how something was executed, and right on the spot, somebody gave me a great solution. So I want to go ahead and iterate on that. And so those 5 minutes, 10 minutes extra are really valuable. But it's amazing without a lot of skill, just sort of forcing yourself to do it. You can often get a couple wireframes out in a day, several different variations, several different pages, and really have a system that's inspired. So a quick example of how I do this, it's very iterative, it's very messy. I like to start with thumbnails of just kind of all the different pieces that I'm thinking about including, or the functionality, or variations of the same thing, and then can allow myself to make decisions from there on how to refine it. So this is a mess, and I wouldn't show this to anyone except for this purpose. Now, what I'm reviewing with my team, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, is this. So it's something that I can walk through with them a little more clearly. And then you'll see it's marked all up, which it wasn't initially. But as I was walking through over a camera, I'm writing down, oh, this wasn't clear. I'll show you what this is. Here is a change that I really want to incorporate. And then finally, I usually have a third to just show all of those changes incorporated. And you can see it's just sort of cut off with a squiggle and continues. And from there, if you want to keep going, you can get really fancy. You can bring these in digitally if you want. There are different ways to do this, but I used to just take a screenshot of a thing and put it in Photoshop and just hack it apart. And it really helps with making ordering changes or repeating list elements or that kind of thing. And again, it's okay that it's a really ugly artifact. You know, it was ugly with a pencil. Maybe it's ugly digitally, as long as everyone's comfortable with that. My new version of that is using something like Figma and a digital tablet, which I'll talk about. But you can see here that I'm bringing sketches right into a digital tool, and I'm able to make revisions on something that would otherwise be fairly static. So shifting from the basics, talking a little bit more about the sort of people and politics side of why I sketch. It's very general because there are so many meetings and notes and workshops and things, but there are a lot of different collaborative ways that I find that this is helpful. And I think this has been one of the greater surprises for me in a recent project, and a strategist sort of encouraged me to share that experience. So this is, as far as the collaborating with someone and solving some of the different problems that you may face, I asked my parents actually to send me this sketch. So they're architects that do a lot of small projects. They own their own business, and typically will meet with a new client over lunch and just hear their idea. So every now and then they say, all right, I have it figured out. I want a new house. It's going to be futuristic vintage. They go, boho, loft, urban, Italian, and and it just keeps going to where you don't really know what that thing is, or maybe they contradict each other and the person doesn't realize that. So whole time that they're talking, you know, immediately that first my dad gets out his legal pad and he starts to sketch. So he's just not making a recommendation, just trying to visualize some of the things that he's hearing and let that person see. And what this allows them to do is avoid that I'll know it when I see it. Part of the issues a lot of times, I think, is that a client and someone that's more deep into an industry don't share the same vocabulary. So in that client's case, they're trying to meet their industry lingo and just whiffing it. And so this way, he can just point and say, do you mean this? Is it like that? And now start to really identify what those words mean to each other. And the client, for what it's worth, feels like they got a bargain because this happened over, you know, tortilla chips, and my dad knows that it's a client worth pursuing. When possible, I do really encourage everybody to sketch, which is a key aspect of it being collaborative, or at least collaborate with you while you're sketching. And I know this isn't always the case, but I do want to make that push here to say, it is extremely beneficial in my experience to get the perspective of a lot of different people, because developers have so much insight into how something is going to load or perform, different edge cases. Business stakeholders might have a different priority that I don't understand, or it relates to a larger system within their organization. There's so many different things that we don't know. And so allowing them to try to get that feedback in really early on in this phase is extremely helpful. And I feel like on the flip side, they feel like they got to really be heard. So I really encourage you to do that. And on the other side of it as well, I have found that we have killed, and I mean this in a good way, we have removed a good, a very high level implementation, very difficult to build, blue skies sort of feature. Those sorts of things can be curbed really early. So a specific example of that, these are sketches from actually a Lullabot product, Tugboat, which is a sort of PR link generator tool. And these are from a business stakeholder and a developer from that project. And the designer, said that those did influence the final product because she learned different things about the pull request process and when there are multiples and these little edge cases that she would not have thought about. A compromise to this approach is breaking out into small groups and each produces a sketch. I like this because you can sort of seed the group with Jeff Eaton's or design and strategists or even just mixing organizations. I like to, put a developer and a business stakeholder together and share that empathy. It also helps with comfort levels if one person really feels more comfortable sketching. We've also done this for just efficiency reasons where each group can focus on a page or a task. That doesn't always work, so I did want to share, of course, to encourage you when you feel the confidence with your practice, or if you already do, of course, to feel free to lead in that way. You don't necessarily want to force a marker into somebody's hand to have them go through your process. So if you have one of those sticky pads or a whiteboard, or it's even in your notebook, you can start just asking questions to rephrase what you're hearing. Make sure that you are understanding, and then try to represent their feedback. You're not making a recommendation. You're just visualizing what you hear everybody saying, and then they can look at something and go from there. Finally, this is a little newer of a way that I've been starting to sketch, which is as more of a deliverable as just a very messy process artifact. Or maybe I should say an initial round of deliverables, because it's not the thing. So again, we're talking about communication, but these are at much later phases of the design. So many have said this before me and better, but we don't need to make beautiful pixel perfect Photoshop comps of websites. We're just making pictures of websites. So really what we're focusing on, right, is the documentation of how to build that website. So focusing on what we actually need allows us to cut some craft. So of course, it sounds obvious, but I do always ask myself, what am I recommending here specifically? I don't want to distract with decisions that we've already made. I don't want to get into details that are too fine, both because they waste my time and it might not be the topic at hand. So maybe, for example, you want to have a label that says heading 1 goes here. Maybe you want to say this is a clear, compelling call to action about learning, digging into a case study. Maybe there is something there. Maybe it's just lorem ipsum. You can see squiggles in boxes. The X with the square is meant to denote an image. And I have often made the mistake previously of trying to tell what that image is and draw very carefully this beautiful image of someone winning the Boston Marathon, and then we change that image, and it's a waste of time. Or the group focuses on, well, should he be in the middle of the race or should he be going over the ribbon? And it's just not the point. So I really do target what I need, and that's how much fidelity. So just to make a quick point related to Drupal, I do think that this is really important as far as using drawing to avoid being hyper prescriptive. You don't want to override or invalidate anything that is out of the box that you plan to use, or individual modules that you're planning, or you don't know yet, that you haven't selected, but when you find them, they will serve your needs well. So I like to keep it a vague doodle. I recently had a very specific example where I presented a beautiful page comp ordered with components with this very specifically designed calendar. And then the reality of the project was that we went with an existing Drupal module calendar picker. And so there is a disconnect for stakeholders at that point. Whereas if we had drawn a sketchy calendar and then implemented that, it would have been consistent with those expectations. Again, it also avoids adding more things to the system. If there's a mistake in your file, it might look like this is a new button style, or if you and your developer aren't collaborating very closely on the styles, you can end up creating a lot of things. But really, I recommend that sketches pair and reference an existing system. Hence the labels like H1, or I would say primary button, secondary button, whatever it is, so that you can translate that very quickly to the site style. Another issue that we have often in web design is just with variations. So generally speaking, if you are doing responsive design, I believe for a while in my experience, there was a time where it was expected to have at least 3 sizes, sometimes 4 of each screen in each state at every variation. And now add to that the flexibility of Drupal and needing to communicate some of that visually. So maybe it's not enough to tell a stakeholder that can be created with Page Builder. We really need to comp up what are the range of flexibility and show them some different use cases and examples, even though that is available. So point being, you could comp every single version of this blog post here with different content and different features at different sizes, or we could do something that is intentionally kind of messy, that is meant to illustrate in a graph or sketch, whatever, that this is a page that has a lot of different insertable optional content. I didn't have to do 18 comps here. I did 2, the basic and the everything. And I know that works as well in Pages, but I just want to note that I think the value here is maybe more in between the pages of just these lines are where things are inserted, and you can see where that goes or which ones are removed where in the, as I call it, the extra guacamole version. Okay, so I've been pretty focused on the designer's role, but I did want to talk on how these artifacts were leveraged during other phases of the project. I won't get too deep, but I know that this does not operate in a bubble. There is a huge disclaimer here. Even with all this knowledge sharing and communication, I fully realize that wireframes do not give the full picture in general, especially when they are rough sketches. So the biggest component here in making this a success is creating pattern and style libraries. So what we're doing is designing components instead of the full pages so that we can show branding elements, spacing, all of the different style components in very great detail that are lacking in the sketches, but having the advantage of not having to show them in every place, not having to repeat them and change copy, doing all those bespoke sorts of things. So really, the sketches aren't meant to be canonical. You really should be referencing a system or whatever your style rule is while assembling things in development. And that's where things really come together. I'd love to hear any questions about that later if they come up. So another aspect from some of the lean wireframes that I showed was that we make spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets. So we were able to create a design systems checklist, which helped us build the pattern library and also just helped with design management. So I was working with a support designer that was able to run with the UI and be able to, actually track status and all these other things, as well as link back to our sketches, jump into content models, those sorts of things. Sort of our jumping board. Here we have some content annotations from that project that allows us to sort of test the content model against the wire. So it's not so much that the sketch, again, is really that important, but it allows us a visual to display different variations and rules that we have outlined in the content strategy. And we were actually doing this in tandem. It was really cool. So sometimes I would get a spreadsheet. Sometimes I would share a sketch with a strategist. we'd work on them together, and then we'd both make refinements because we'd see that the data dictionary was just lacking a couple fields, or we're really not going to show that anyway, and that's a lot of work for editors and those kinds of things. We also found that this can sometimes speak a little louder with clients to have the visual, even though it's ugly, than many tabs and columns in a data dictionary spreadsheet. And finally, we did the same thing with backend development documentation. I know this one's really robust, but we're just marking all over them. We're not worried about them being messy. We're just noting either implementation details or questions or flags. And you can see here, they're just on the right on an artboard. But if you use something fancy like Figma or InVision, you can use commenting as well right on it. But really the point I wanted to show here is we found in this example that there was a miscommunication in what the sidebar was going to contain. Because the annotation says, I don't know what this is. So that was a really great conversation for us to clarify that and discuss what our options were. All right, touching on tools, I wanted to just sort of bucket this all together. Even though I have already said very quickly, you can use anything. And I think that your own experimentation is very important. I used to find I wanted an eraser with a pencil. Now I really like a chunky marker. My favorite is a fine Sharpie. Everyone's got their thing. Of course, a notebook is great to have with you to keep track of stuff and just have something available. They say the best camera is the one you have, but I did have a couple specific ideas to share here. First and foremost, templates are huge. I really like to use grid or dot grid paper when I'm sketching. So these have just a really light grid line behind them. And then they also have grids at the top, the width of different device sizes. So I can see a grid very quickly and line up my sidebars and those kinds of things. These are really helpful, especially thinking through responsive design. So we'll often bring packs of these to on-sites and do one page at once. So I want to sketch mobile and desktop together. And then if there are special UI situations or interaction, of course, tablet is great to work through as well. But you can get really creative with your grid. So if you have a site that you are working on adding to that is going to have an existing sidebar in the left third, you can create a template that blocks that out or includes your header navigation and starts you within that framework. JotNot is my favorite app for this. I think it's about $4. They didn't sponsor this, but one of our biggest problems initially was keeping track of the sketches. This happens both if you're all remote and you never had that sketch, or we were together and all the sketches go in a manila folder, and then that manila folder goes in a suitcase, and you might want to reference something and we don't all have access to that. So we try at the end of every session, just before you get up, to take a picture. What JotNot lets you do is drag the corners around and actually skews it to be straight for the most part and really increases the contrast. So it's the kinds of effects I would want to fix a sketch and it looks like a scan, but I just took a picture with my phone. And of course, whatever your system is, if you use a Google Photos album or Slack or Dropbox, just make sure you have some sort of shared folder where this is all accessible. If you are in person, dry erase boards are great. I like that they are, they present, they're standing up. It's kind of a quick thing. You have to finish it because you have to erase it. And I think that you can kind of edit right on top. It's a very chunky marker. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about whiteboards. It's a lot of self-restraint. I like these giant pads of sticky pages. I'm not exactly sure what they're called. It's like a giant Post-it, which in this case has Post-its on top of it, like an MTV show. So I like this because you can just sort of tear one off, put it next to the easel with sticky back and keep working and just sort of save your place. And so let's say we're in an on-site for 2 days. Now we're in the second day, and all the stuff that, in this case, we did on the first day are in the whiteboards behind us. So we're able to just reference that very quickly and see what that user had as a specific pain point in our persona activity. Just referencing that stuff in a big visual way, whatever it is very handy. This is my fanciest favorite tool, and this is another Jeff Eaton special, if you're familiar with one of my coworkers. He brought this to an onsite, and all it is are laminated 11 by 17 pieces of paper, but they work like portable whiteboards. So you have a dry erase. So I guess I lied. Here I am again. But I really like these because you can hold them up, you can pass them out, you can fly with them, use both sides, take a picture with your phone, and then wipe them off before the next session starts. It really has been the best of both worlds for us. I often get I get the question of how I sketch so straight and keep the sketches clean. And honestly, I just use straight edges, not even a straight edge, like a ruler. So this is a picture of real things on my real desk. I have been using a blister pack top that I stole years ago from packaging because it was kind of a perfect iPhone shape for a lot of years. At the time, I've used the edge of a Christmas card. And this is very silly, but really small. If you see, there's like little dots, 4 dots on this little nameplate on my desk. And 2 of them are to denote a standard page width, and the other 2 are a standard content grid, which allows me to draw a page on multiple sheets of paper or screens and then kind of Frankenstein them together so they all fit right. So it's nice to just have some sort of consistent system. And I know that's a lot of strategy and rationale for 4 dots. This is a little tangent. I wish I had more time. I might do a demo with this or something, but I did want to show this product that I use. It's a little pricey. They are introducing the Remarkable 2, which is going to be cheaper, but essentially this is a sketching tablet that offers a textured screen, so it feels kind of real with the pen, e-reader ink. You can share PDFs. There's kind of a mediocre handwriting to text translator. And my favorite thing, which I mentioned earlier, is the ability to sync SVGs of the pages. So you can really easily modify the sketches digitally, pull them apart, duplicate sections, add more details. It's really cool. And you can do a lot of these things in the app as well. So I can take the lasso and select a thumbnail, a headline, and some metadata, and then dupe, and drag the duplicated objects of those groups of things down below and very quickly make a list that looks nice. And again, no, they did not sponsor the talk. It is nice. They have the Remarkable 2 is coming out, but I believe it's been delayed for obvious reasons. And in case it's not obvious, that's how I did this talk, and most of these sketches are from there. So I talked about this as well, but essentially we have this digital artifact that we can create here. So what I've done is taken these SVGs from my Figma sync, drop them into, from my Remarkable, and drop them into Figma. And then I have multiple artboards here, so I can swim through different variations, like most standard programs like this. I can leave comments, and we can have really robust conversations. And then I can just change things and drag them around. So we move the hero up and down, and these changes are really easy, really quick. I don't have to resketch, but I didn't have to leave this all out digitally. I will just say again, it's whatever you prefer. I think the point here is not, oh, Figma, I love Figma, but if you use InVision, that's great. It does the same stuff. Whatever UI program that you know you're ultimately going to iterate in down the road, I try to build my wireframes in those anyway. And even though there isn't a lot of overlap here, like there might be with a really digitally refined wire, I still think it's beneficial to start there. So use what you love. We have a lot of different artifacts and productivity apps when we're remote, but it really depends on what you do and what you like to use again. So just specifically, I mentioned that we use video calls, which is really important, and we want to have screen sharing so we can go over our documents as well as our camera. Slack call is great. I like that you can at least give someone an emoji when you're muted. So if someone's presenting, you can just thumbs up or clap with an emoji, because we don't all have soundboards, you know. We take a lot of notes. So paper docs are our favorite, but a Google Doc, what have you, both before and during. And then again, whatever your folder app or sharing of choice thing is. I will mention Slack again, though, because in addition to a Dropbox of images, we have really liked just sharing them as a timeline in a design channel or a project channel. This allows anybody that's asynchronous or not at that onsite or checking up, later or what have you, or myself looking a week later to say, I wanted to follow up on the sketch from the second session. It allows us to have a timeline and then not sure everyone's feelings on the threads feature, but you can get right in there and start asking specific questions and getting feedback already. So that's surprisingly handy. I also really have found benefit and value from a cheap little desk camera. So this is the IPEVO. They what do you call it? They discontinued this and reintroduced this as another product. So I had to have to look up the exact name, but you can just tilt it down to the notebook on your desk. And so you don't have to take a screenshot or a picture. You can actually show things real time, point at something, switch back and forth from your camera and make the changes there. Okay, so I did want to go over one recent project with my last couple slides here with just a few sketching examples, just random ways that this was applied. So I had the opportunity to work with the Digital Services Georgia team for Georgia.gov last year. And we had several on-sites throughout this content strategy project. So some of them I went to Atlanta and some of them I called into remotely. So I wanted to show a little bit of each. Some of the times, like I said before, I'm really just trying to take notes. So I'm hearing the kinds of things that people are talking about the bio page, for example, should do and what sort of functionality. I'm creating my rough little thumbnails. And then as I'm hearing consensus, I'm starting to clean that up. And so in this example, this was sort of the second version after that real messy list note-takey one. That was just in that session while we were talking about a content type. And in this situation, it wasn't something we planned as an activity, but it turned out to be really helpful to just turn that sketch around near the end of the session and say, is this what everybody meant? Sometimes when you do that, you can hear two people describe how they're on the same page when they aren't. And it's always very satisfying and important, to reveal that when I say, here's what you were all talking about, and one person is, passionately nodding and the other one is passionately shaking their head. And then they see that there's a discrepancy and what are the differences. Another one was a remote session about some content modeling work based on what was in the existing Drupal site and some really interesting editor workflows. And I'll be honest, there were some things that were flying past my head. And so I was frantically trying to sketch and keep track of this thing goes in this direction, but it doesn't go back. This is a group of this. How does this work? Again, just for me. And afterwards, I thought, it's actually kind of a good visual summary. So I put it into the Slack and then I went to lunch. So I thought this was a cool story. It turns out that they're waiting in the buffet line and one of them has Slack on their phone and pulls it up. And just organically, they start talking about the sketch together and confirming which things are shared knowledge in the group and which of them had questions. And they started running with ideas. So they came back from lunch and just very quickly shared some feedback about the last session. So I think that sort of revision cycle you can see again is helpful. For the last one, I wanted to show this really interesting experiment of validating page building with some site admins, similar to one of the presentations today. But we had to address very different levels of understanding of the sites and how to use the tools. So first, we had to just visually explain page building at all, and then try to give them a set of components to understand the framework that they could work with. So how do you do that before development? Well, the answer is you get these really cool laminated whiteboard sheets from a coworker, and you draw a bunch of very ugly component layouts on flashcards while you're on a plane, and then you build the pages together that way. It was something that I wanted to show because it's sketching, but it didn't require the client to do it. They could just pick one, or they could say, well, it's like that one, but it's actually it's not 4 circles, it's 8. And we'd say, okay. And we could sketch that for them right there. So not only did we validate the concept, but then we were able to get in specifically and build an example page with them, which allowed them to give us feedback on the page builder in general. We get to document what their wireframe was to start designing with. And there were a couple times where none of the cards worked, and we ended up creating new components that we ultimately designed. Yeah, thanks. So that's how sketching fits into my process when I am trying to move design work forward. But this is personal and iterative. So I encourage you to see what works best for you and the given context. And so, I hope that over time, there will be little places where you'll pepper it in to see that value, and that might increase over time. It's not something you're building into your SOWs, is my point, the sketching week. It's just that sometimes you really find that it helps you. Also, disclaimer, not just your thing. You have to build together with the end in mind. These transitions are not always seamless. And so you absolutely need to set these expectations. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a client looking for a perfect comp, or a developer unhappy with your documentation. So just ask what everybody needs, or doodle an example and then ask. And I'm going to say this again, it's not just for wires. I think there are so many different things that you can make of journey maps and customer flows and different interactions, or even how audiences are broken down and diagrams and things like that. There's a lot that you can do. I just really wanted to show wires because that's so close to home for me, and I had enough sketchbooks full of them. So here's an example of a thing that is not that, not to scope to that talk. I think you can scale these ideas to whatever you're doing. In this situation, it was a much simpler problem, which was that I wanted to make this nut a Halloween costume, my dog. So I'm watching YouTube, I don't have any paper, I measure the dog, and I literally just flip over a sheet of stamps and do this messy thing. But it doesn't matter how ugly it is, no one had to see it, until now. But it's enough. This little doodle was just enough to facilitate me ordering supplies, and then way later, remembering what the dimensions were when I made the thing. So it didn't matter that it was an ugly deliverable because I wasn't delivering the stamps. I was delivering my dog in the coffee cup from Game of Thrones. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for weird places like this that sketching might fit into your life. Thank you so much. I would love to take any questions if you have time. Otherwise, I'll be hanging out in the Slack.
Yeah, that was great.